Vinland Saga is vastly different from most anime. Anybody that's watched it can tell you that it's much deeper than just a simple bloody shonen story about Vikings massacring each other. Yet we get plenty of that as well. There's a reason it's become one of the most popular anime of the last few years, and I personally believe it's the emotional depth that's unique in this genre of storytelling. So today, we're going to be taking a look at just some of what makes Vinland Saga so special. And this will be your only warning of spoilers, as we will cover all of Season 1 in this video.
A victor should speak of how the world should be, rather than how the world currently operates!
This will be the first in a two-part series, where I analyze two distinct aspects that stood out to me in the first season of Vinland Saga. Two vital lessons that I believe can be learned from this series. Those lessons being one of impermanence, and the other of love. These lessons were inspired by two integral speeches found in the season that will be highlighted for each respective video. I'll also be pulling from real-world ideology, speech, and history to help ground things. And just to be clear, this video is not a review or theory video, but an analytical dive into the deeper meanings of Vinland Saga. So, without further delay, this is Vinland Saga and the lesson of impermanence.
Long after I've rotted away, how do you intend to live your life, Thorfinn?
Impermanence is defined as the state or fact of lasting for only a limited period of time. On the surface, Vinland Saga is a nuanced story of revenge gone wrong for a young Danish child that got caught up in an assassination plot on his father. That's not to say that this overarching plot isn't important, or that there isn't some depth to what goes into Thorfinn's story of revenge, though. The suffering and grief he feels in that moment of watching his father get riddled with arrows, the anger that overtakes him and blinds him, and the numbing tunnel vision that envelops him until he ultimately becomes Askeladd's lapdog, simply for a chance of potentially avenging his father, are all important and vital to making Vinland Saga what it is. We see even moments where Thorfinn dreams of his father Thor's, telling him that revenge is wrong, and that it's not what would make him happy, making us think but for a few moments that maybe Thorfinn will wake up from this vengeance-fueled hysteria. But unfortunately, it's not until the loss of the one he longed after all this time that he realized how fruitless the quest for revenge really is. And this battle-tested story of revenge is but the first layer when it comes to the layers of emotional depth the Vinland Saga has for us to dive into. I believe, though, that the true lesson to be learned from Vinland Saga isn't simply revenge is bad, which, yeah, obviously it is, but what we can learn about death, love, doubt, loss, impermanence, and more. There are countless examples throughout the story that by the time this video is finished, you'll see just how in your face it was the entire time. The examples range from incredibly obvious like the death of characters such as Thor's and King Sweyn, to things a little more nuanced such as Canut's soup growing cold, or the change of seasons, to the most profound like the death of Thorfinn's innocence. In the study of philosophy, impermanence is considered the problem of change, and it is a complex concept that is prominent in several religions and beliefs, such as mortal life into the eternal life in Abrahamic religions. In Western society, Heraclitus's Pantarei, where everything flows, is considered the first major appearance of the concept, whereas Eastern philosophies feature it prominently, such as the doctrine of anicca in Buddhism, which is quite literally the doctrine of impermanence. One of the first steps towards enlightenment in Buddhism is recognizing anicca and the impermanence of all things in life and the greater universe. Vinland Saga emphasizes this ever-changing world episode after episode, scene after scene, and is perfectly highlighted in Askeladd's speech to Thorfinn in episode 10, Ragnarok. During this speech, Askeladd tells Thorfinn about how time is on his side, and that there may be a time he loses to Thorfinn in a duel eventually. But what comes next is what I found most riveting. He observes the world around him and tells of those that came before, specifically the Romans. He and Thorfinn are standing in stone and marble ruins built by the mighty Romans, yet the Saxons destroyed them. Askeladd details how the land used to be called Britannia and was advanced, but now it's nothing more than rubble, nearly forgotten to time. Human civilization moves ahead, growing older with every season. The Romans were defeated by the Saxons, who are now about to be conquered by the Danes. It implies that eventually the Danes too will be defeated, if not by another civilization, then by divine intervention.
Ragnarok.
Which implies the end. However, in Norse mythology, not even Ragnarok is the end. It's merely a cleansing or a restart. After Surtur has engulfed the world in flame and Ragnarok has ended, it is to rise again and be repopulated by Lif and Lifthrasir. He ends his speech with,
A new dawn is breaking in the age of twilight.
Ashlod quite literally realizes that the age they are living in is the end of something, or the twilight, and the beginning or dawn of something new. In this case, it's the end of the Saxon Empire and the beginning of the Danish reign. And while Ashlod's lesson is lost on Thorfinn, we as the viewer can discern a lot from this speech that opens our eyes to what this show is truly trying to show us. We see the impermanence of many characters' lives. Thor's death that sets everything into motion. The death of minor characters such as the older woman that cared for Thorfinn when he was found in the woods. The deaths of both Ragnar and King Sweyn that directly impact Canute and forge the impermanence of Canute the timid and turn him into Canute the confident ruler. And of course, ultimately, the death of Ashlod. The culmination and catalyst of everything that has happened and everything that will come. The end of the twilight and the beginning of a new dawn. But not just in death do we see character impermanence, but also in characters that simply come and go in the show. For instance, Ann in episode 14. She has a backstory, though rather shallow. We learn a bit about her family, her aspirations, and her vice of thievery. Yet, she is only in this one episode. A character that easily could have stuck around for the rest of the season in some way is gone in the next episode, and not even by death. There are nuanced and more passive examples that come into play several times throughout the story. For example, in his fight with Thorfinn, Thorkel's tunic gets damaged. He makes the comment on how much he really liked the garments, but then proceeds to completely rip them off with no regard whatsoever. Now Thorkel is an important character for this lesson of impermanence, because he is really the only character, aside from Ashlod, that goes along with the flow of change. However, where Ashlod observes, acknowledges, and tries to leverage these changes for his benefit, Thorkel is more like an object floating along in the river of change. He doesn't try to stop it in any way, nor does he let it slow him down. He simply adapts and keeps moving with it. Whether it's his comrades falling beside him, the ruler that's lining his pockets, his fingers being involuntarily removed, or just ripping off some clothing that he was fond of.
I realize the life and death of the body doesn't matter. The soul is what has meaning for a warrior.
Another passive example that we all experience regularly, but I thought was highlighted well, is the changing of the seasons. We almost pay it no mind, but these changes directly impact the story and create further changes and consequences. The change from autumn to winter forces Ashlod's troops to ransack and slaughter a village just to stay alive. While they're stationed here, we see other small examples, like Canute mentioning how the soup has grown cold while waiting for Ragnar to return.
What a shame. By the time he's back, his soup will be cold.
Which will not happen because yet another change has occurred with Ragnar's death. And when we look deep enough into things, we see impermanence in profound habitual human traits. Revisiting Anne quickly, we see a character who is already challenging their faith decide to accept her condemnation to hell for her thievery. She then witnesses men commit even more heinous crimes in the slaughtering of her entire village and family, without so much as hesitation for God's divine punishment. But that said, there is also the transition of belief into doubt, outlined countless times in the season. The children move from believing Leif's stories to doubting him almost instantaneously. Ashlod's men doubting his luck and leadership after being loyal followers for so long. and even the devout priest that himself
Because,
begins to
dear
doubt
Lord,
the love of his own God.
I do not see your love. So I begin to doubt it.
Doubt is a powerful catalyst of change in philosophical, theological, and scientific systems. Thomas the Apostle proves that doubt can even be a route to deeper faith. Now, there are two characters that I believe are impacted the most from the inevitability of impermanence in this series, both externally and internally. Our Prince Canute, and of course Thorfinn. Canute begins as a timid, shy, and helpless individual who is driven to change through the transformations happening around him. His meeting with Thorfinn begins to loosen him up to the world outside the protective walls of the castle. Unfortunately, we don't see much of Canute's backstory until Season 2, but regardless, we know from Ragnar that the prince has really been this way all the way from his childhood. Losing his beloved protector in Ragnar, experiencing the cruelties of war, and finally the message from his priest eventually creates Canute, who is resolute in his ideals and begins to take charge. Now Thorfinn, as the main character, is the most diverse and integral examples of impermanence. But what is impressive is that it's entirely lost on him. Thorfinn changes from a wide-eyed child with grand visions of seeing the world, becoming an explorer or warrior of the sea, to a vengeance-fueled single-mindset murderer, who is then forced to change once more upon the death, or in another moment of impermanence, of his only sole purpose. We don't see the outcome of his transformation until Season 2. However, I implore you to watch or rewatch Season 2 with this lesson in mind and see all of the nuanced changes you may have missed prior. Perhaps the best way to sum this all up is by once again revisiting that speech from Ashlon. He prefaces everything with a small yet succinct message.
That's the way of things. Even the strongest die in the end.
That's the way of things. It's simply the nature of life in the universe. Everything changes. It's the way of things. I want to thank you for watching my first video on this channel. If you made it through the entire video, I would appreciate it if you could leave a thumbs up. And if you want to be notified when I upload the next video on the lesson of love, please click subscribe and the notification bell. I'd love to discuss this with anyone who may have more to add or alternate points of perspectives, so please feel free to leave a comment and let's have a conversation. Stay tuned for the second video in this Vinland Saga series that will be coming soon. Thanks again for watching, and peace and love to you all.